Welcome on into the Wolverine TV. Clayton Safey here with EJ Holland and Tim Verghese. We are going to break down the five biggest things that we learned about Michigan football recruiting in the month of December now that we've moved on to the new year. So happy new year to everybody. The biggest thing that happened last month was signing day, of course, the early signing period. And Michigan with a strong close. A lot of momentum coming off the 2021 season. They had just won the Big Ten championship about a week and a half before. And they were able to ride that momentum into, like I said, a really strong finish in the 2022 class. We'll talk to both of you guys about this one, but EJ, we'll start with you. Your biggest takeaways from what Michigan was able to do, some fireworks there on signing day.
Definitely Keon Saab was probably the biggest takeaway for me. I think that was the most impressive recruitment of Michigan's 2022 recruiting cycle. Of course, you could reference Will Johnson, but he's a legacy, I think, with Keon Saab. This is a guy that was committed to Clemson, made a visit despite Clemson's no-visit policy. Michigan was able to beat out a late run from Georgia to close with Keon Saab, and he's a dynamic talent, arguably the best hybrid safety linebacker flex guy in the secondary that you can find nationally. So I think landing Keon Saab was huge. I think it shows that Michigan can win and beat key teams like Clemson, like a Georgia in big time recruitment. So overall, I felt like Saab was the biggest win of the recruiting cycle. And I'm sure Tim will give his takeaways on Darius Clemens, who he's a guy that's very high on. But again, landing a big time receiver like that, and then getting two really intriguing athletes to flip. I don't think we've talked a ton about Alex Orji and Amarion Walker. These were guys that were committed elsewhere that actually flipped on National Signing Day. Amarion Walker is a guy I saw live and was kind of up and down as a receiver, but I really like him as a defensive back athlete type. He can play on either side of the ball. Same thing with Alex Orji. He's an upside quarterback right now that was committed to Virginia Tech and projects very highly as a linebacker if quarterback doesn't work out. So I thought Michigan had a terrific close. Like I said, you can mention Darius Clemens, you can mention Derek Moore, but I think the intriguing athlete flips late, I think Keon Saab, those were some things that really moved the needle with me.
Yeah, Tim, what about you? I mean, obviously, like EJ mentioned, some of the guys flipping at the end, some of the guys choosing Michigan, like a Keon Saab. But what were some of your biggest takeaways from signing day?
Yeah, I think looking at it from a bigger picture perspective, I just think like what we learned about the coaching staff. I mean, Ron Bellamy, Mike McDonald, some of these first year coaches, they really closed strong on the recruiting trail. I think specifically Ron Bellamy was involved in so many recruitments down the stretch, even like flipping to the offensive side of the ball. He played a big key in landing Darius Clemens. So I think learning about all these guys, and I think less of what we learned about them, more than what they learned in that last month. Just how high they can shoot. And I think that'll give them a big advantage heading into 2023 as they start to put that class together of, hey, we can shoot for the stars. We can beat out the best of them for the best recruits in the country because, we're Michigan, we're a brand. Now we have strong recruiters on our coaching staff.
Definitely. The one thing that happened on signing day that was, I guess, a little bit of a surprise, but not really. Cavante Henry, a guy who EJ and both of you guys have kind of reported was potentially maybe not going to sign with Michigan, especially with Courtney Morgan moving on to Washington. He played a key factor in his recruitment, but edge rusher there out of California, he remains unsigned, technically still a Michigan commit. And then the other thing with signing day there was Aaron Alexander, who was committed out of Belleville. He is no longer in the class and not a commit anymore. But I guess EJ, more specifically talking about Cavante Henry, just how kind of that played out.
So, like he said, he's still in the class. Technically, he's still a Michigan commit, but obviously, with him not signing to Michigan during the early period and with Courtney Morgan bolting over to Washington, I think it would be surprising if he stayed in the class. One of the biggest reasons he committed, and perhaps the biggest reason he committed to Michigan in the first place in June, was because of Courtney Morgan, a Los Angeles native who really knew his coaching staff well, who understood him on a personal level. And Cavante Henry always needed that mentor type, and that's what Courtney Morgan was supposed to provide. Henry actually made an official visit to Washington the weekend before signing day, so right before the dead period started. He's expected to make official visits to Oklahoma, to Florida. I don't think he'll make his way back to Michigan at this point in time, even though he's a commit. I wouldn't consider him a commit.
And then a guy who is a commit now in the class of 2023, Samaj Morgan, who I feel like a lot of people are kind of forgetting that he's a Michigan commit because it was just before signing day at the beginning of December there. But that's a key pickup for the Wolverines on the trail. West Bloomfield guy. Ron Bellamy coached him, of course. Smaller, shiftier type of maybe slot type of guy. Your thoughts on that going down in the earlier on in the month?
Yeah, you're right. I think it came in the middle of all the signing day craze, but Samaj Morgan is a key land in state. Like you said, a slot guy that's about 5'9", 5'10" right now, really compact build at about 180. So he's more of an AJ Henning type of guy that you can use in the backfield. You can use as a return guy. He can stretch the field vertically. Yeah, but you can use him, in various different ways with end arounds and reverses and all types of gadget plays as well. But straight up, I think he's not as fast or as explosive as AJ Henning was at this point as a recruit. You have to remember AJ Henning was a top 150 prospect nationally. But I do think that Samaj Morgan is still plenty fast, plenty of explosive, and more polished as a route runner and as a, just a pure pass catching receiver. I feel like AJ Henning was a running back playing receiver, whereas Samaj Morgan is a receiver built like a running back that can be used in the AJ Henning role. So I think it's a plus that he's more of a natural receiver than AJ was, albeit not as highly touted of a recruiter, maybe not as fast or as explosive. He makes up with it with his route running, with his hands. I mean, you see some of the highlights that he posts on social media, and it's just a bunch of one-handers and him just, having some great routes, just stop routes, comeback slants. He's really, really hard to cover on short to intermediate routes. And like I said, he's more than capable of stretching the field as well. I saw him earlier this fall, and he got vertical for a couple of touchdowns. So I really like Samaj Morgan. I think he's really undervalued as well. He's not even ranked by On3 right now. I think they'll probably start him as a high 3-star just because they haven't seen him live. But this is a guy that could easily earn a 4-star by the time, next signing day comes around.
Definitely. And then Tim, talking about momentum in the 2023 class, and you mentioned earlier how Michigan can win some recruitments against some bigger school, or not bigger schools, but schools that recruit at that elite level, like a Georgia, for example. Michigan was able to land linebacker Raylan Wilson over Georgia earlier on in the month as well. So that's just kind of one example. That's another thing that we learned.
Yeah, for sure. And this is like a pretty much a straight up win for Michigan. Obviously, they couldn't pull it out on the field, but on the recruiting trail, they were able to head beat out Georgia for Raylan Wilson. And this is a big land for a couple of reasons. Linebacker is a big position of need in the 23 class. They're shooting for a lot of high 4-star, potentially even 5-star guys in the class. There's some high targets left, but getting one of those linebackers in the boat already, and one that, like Wilson, is a plus athlete, can cover the whole range of the field. We saw what a linebacker can do at an elite level in like Nakobe Dean against Michigan. This is a similar level athlete, like just purely from an athlete. Obviously, he's got some football things he's got to develop. He's got some work to do in developing some of his other skills, but he's a pure athlete, and getting him in the boat kind of takes that stress. As you shoot for Attack and Curtis or some of these other high 4-star linebackers to pair with Wilson moving forward.
And then, EJ, the last thing that we learned, Albert Karshnia is taking over as Director of Recruiting Operations, kind of stepping into potentially part of what Courtney Morgan was doing as Director of Player Personnel. Expect them to potentially also add to that department, as well as Jim Harbaugh really over the last calendar year has started to beef up the recruiting department a little bit. A guy who not coached, but was on the Michigan recruiting staff in 2015 and 2016. He went to school at Michigan as well, interned with the program there. So he's very loyal to Jim Harbaugh, to Michigan, coming over from Central Michigan, where he was their recruiting coordinator or recruiting director. What are your thoughts on this hire? I know it's not the flashy hire as you've written about, but at the same time, it's probably a solid one for Michigan, especially if they add some more people to that department.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the first things I mentioned when I came over from the Texas beat was just, hey, I was on a fellow blue blood, beat, and at Texas the recruiting department was so stacked compared to when I first got on the Michigan beat. It was Matty Dudek and a bunch of basically Gophers. So I feel like Michigan's taking a huge step in the right direction just over the last year. And there were, some people that argued against it, that, the recruiting department's just fine. And it's not. Harbaugh realized that. And now he's really beefing it up with some talent. I think Albert Carson, as you mentioned, not a huge name, but just a grinder, a guy that's going to develop relationships around the Midwest. You have to remember, even though he was at a Central Michigan, which isn't, big name program, high school coaches absolutely love smaller schools that give attention to guys that may not be as highly touted as a Will Johnson or as a Samaj Morgan, or guys with more notoriety. I think with Albert Carson, he already has those strong connections around the Midwest, just recruiting more under the radar guys. Now he can come back to those schools and say, "Hey, I'm after your even more highly touted recruits in these future classes." So I think Albert Carson is going to be just fine. And from everything I've gathered, he's a really, really hard worker. And he's going to, like you said, he's really loyal to Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. I think he's going to do everything possible to amp up Michigan's recruiting. And I also feel like you said, adding another person to the staff, and there's a reason he wasn't given the same title as Courtney Morgan, because Michigan's continuing to add to this recruiting department. I think that it's only going to get better from here. Christina DeRuiter was an excellent hire. She's been great at her role as director of on-campus recruiting. They promoted to Sean Larkins. A lot of the analysts have been increasingly involved in recruiting as well. So I feel like, right now Michigan's doing everything possible to beef up that recruiting department. And like I said, when I was at Texas, it really resembled Ohio State. Tom Herman came over from, or had previous history under Urban Meyer at Ohio State. So it really resembled that structure. And I think Michigan's doing its best to not just resemble the structure, but to outperform Ohio State from its recruiting department standpoint. And Michigan should. It's Michigan. They have the resources to do so. So I think Albert Karshnia is a great hire for that role. And I think they're going to continue to beef up the recruiting department as they should. And, it's like Jim Harbaugh, I guess, is mentioning in these contract negotiations. He wants to take care of his staff. And I think he's right in the sense that Michigan should have, the highest paid assistants. They should have the best recruiting department in the country. It's Michigan, man.
Love it. Absolutely. So yeah, keep an eye on all of that, potentially adding to that department. Also, of course, the Jim Harbaugh, potentially getting a raise, potentially upping that assistant coaching salary pool, all at thewolverine.com. $1 gets you an entire year of our premium coverage. So go and do that right now. It's all over the front page, $1 for a year, and we'll see you over there.